I stood at the absolute center of the grand ballroom at the Plaza Hotel in Manhattan, draped in a custom-tailored haute couture gown. By all rights, my fiancé, Ethan Carter, should have been standing right beside me. Instead, he was up on the stage, holding hands with another woman. I knew her. Claire Vance. She was his white moonlight, the one who got away, who had just returned from Paris, where she had made a modest name for herself in the European art scene. Wearing a flowing, ethereal white silk dress, she clung to Ethan's arm, a soft, delicate smile playing on her lips. She looked far more like the guest of honor than I, his actual fiancé, did on my own 24th birthday. Below the stage, the wealthy guests of New York society froze. Half-raised champagne flutes hung suspended in midair. Mouths hung agape. In the very front row of the VIP section, my mother, Eleanor Shepard, looked incredibly pale, her manicured fingers gripping the mahogany armrest of her chair so tightly her knuckles turned white. My father, Charles Shepard, remained outwardly composed, his hand holding his glass of scotch without a single tremor, but I could see the twin fires burning in his eyes even from across the crowded ballroom. Ethan cleared his throat. The microphone let out a sharp, ear-piercing screech. He looked down at Claire, and the two of them exchanged a gaze so thick with affection it was nauseating. Then, he spoke. "Thank you all for coming tonight, but there is a much more important announcement I need to make. Effective immediately, my engagement to Vivian Shepard is officially dissolved." The room erupted into whispers. Gasps rippled through the crowd. People turned their heads to steal furtive glances at me, some with pity, some with malicious glee, but most simply waiting for me to scream, cry, or make a humiliating scene. Ethan continued, his voice carrying the smooth, practiced ease of a man who believed he was in absolute control. "Claire and I have known each other since we were kids. It was only due to a series of misunderstandings that we were separated for so many years. Now that she's back, I refuse to let her go again. Vivian is a wonderful woman, but we are simply not compatible. I truly hope she finds the happiness she deserves." Beside him, Claire gently tugged on his sleeve, her voice soft enough to melt stone. "Ethan, please, don't say any more." Her eyes welled with tears, making her look entirely like the victim, as if I were the one who had bullied her. In the crowd, the quiet gossiping grew louder. "This is incredibly brutal. Doing this at Miss Shepard's own birthday gala? I heard the Carter family's tech startup only survived the last 3 years because the Shepards kept pouring money into it. Isn't he burning his bridges a bit too thoroughly? What do you know? Word is his company just secured a massive independent valuation. He doesn't need to rely on her family anymore." I stood there, gently swirling the champagne in my flute. The pale gold liquid coated the glass, much like the polite, stoic smile plastered on my face. My mother, shaking with rage, was on the verge of storming the stage. I caught her eye and gave her a slight, reassuring shake of my head. Ethan, determined to deliver the final blow, reached into his tuxedo pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Opening it, he revealed a freshly designed diamond ring entirely different from the one on my finger. This ring, he declared proudly, was custom-made by a master jeweler specifically for Claire. The value of this, I didn't let him finish. I raised my hand. The brilliant crystal chandeliers overhead caught the light of the $3 million Cartier emerald-cut diamond resting on my ring finger. The sheer brilliance of it was blinding. Slowly, deliberately, I slid the ring off my finger. The room fell dead silent. Even Ethan froze, entirely unsure of what I was doing. I held the ring up to my eye, inspecting it casually, then glanced at the beautiful couple on stage. Then, I lightly clapped my hands together. Clap, 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 clap. 3 sharp claps echoed through the silent ballroom like a scalpel slicing through glass. Everyone stared at me in disbelief. Claire's gentle smile froze on her face. Ethan's brow furrowed. He was likely wondering why I wasn't crying, why I wasn't screaming, and why on earth I was applauding. Smiling, I walked over to the edge of the stage, my heels clicking sharply against the polished marble floor. I took the microphone from the stunned MC, stepped up the stairs, and stood directly in front of Ethan. He was half a head taller than me, and I usually had to look up to meet his eyes. But right now, as I stared directly at his throat, he looked incredibly small. "Are you finished?" I asked. My voice wasn't loud, but the microphone carried it clearly to every corner of the room. Ethan's Adam's apple bobbed. "Vivian. I hope you can understand I'm doing great. Thank you for asking," I interrupted smoothly. I turned to face the hundreds of guests in the ballroom, my smile flawless and unwavering. "Today is my 24th birthday. Thank you all for coming to celebrate with me, Mr. Carter just announced that our engagement is off." I completely agree with his decision. Another collective gasp. Claire's expression faltered, and she shrunk back slightly behind Ethan, murmuring, "Miss Shepherd, please don't be like this." I didn't mean to. I ignored her completely and kept my eyes on the crowd. "However, Mr. Carter, before you take Miss Vance's hand and walk out of these doors, there is one minor detail we need to settle in front of everyone." Ethan's eyes flickered with unease. "What detail?" I reached into my designer clutch and pulled out a crisp sheet of paper. Unfolding it, I revealed lines of dense text, capped off with Ethan's bold signature and a red notary stamp. I held it up, displaying it to the entire room before placing it directly under Ethan's nose. 3 years ago, when you wanted to launch your startup but lacked the seed money, I lent you $30 million from my personal trust fund," I said, my voice steady, pronouncing each word with icy precision. "You promised you would pay me back and insisted on writing this promissory note. With a compounded annual interest rate of 20%, the total balance due as of today stands at exactly $48 million. Ethan's face drained of all color. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a dry, choking sound came out. Claire froze, the watery innocence in her eyes instantly replaced by sheer terror. I stepped forward, pressing the paper firmly against his chest. "Ethan, we can call off the wedding, we can throw away our history, but you will pay your debts." The room remained dead silent for 5 agonizing seconds before erupting into absolute chaos. People were laughing, whispering frantically, and some even clapped. Ethan swayed slightly, his eyes locked onto the promissory note, his hands trembling violently. "Vivian, you. You? Me? What about me?" I lifted the microphone to my lips, my smile as bright as the chandeliers above. "Ethan, congratulations on finding your true love. Since you are so eager to marry Miss Vance, I'll expect the $48 million wired to my account before the end of the night." With a soft thud, Ethan's knees buckled. In front of Manhattan's entire high society, he collapsed onto his knees amidst the champagne-colored rose petals littering the stage. The promissory note slipped from his trembling fingers, fluttering through the air before landing right by my Louboutin heels. Claire let out a small shriek and reached down to help him, but her own legs gave out, and she sat down hard on the floor beside him. I handed the microphone back to the MC and walked down the stage, my steps firm and measured. As I passed my mother, she looked at me with tears in her eyes, unable to speak. I squeezed her hand and whispered, "Don't worry, Mom. This is only the beginning." My father finally set his scotch down, offering me a slight, barely perceptible nod of approval. I looked toward the grand entrance of the ballroom. A tall man in a tailored black suit stood there, his striking features silhouetted against the dim light of the foyer. He gave me a subtle nod, turned, and disappeared into the New York night. "Happy birthday, Vivian. I'm quite pleased with this birthday gift." The chaos in the ballroom showed no signs of slowing down. Ethan remained on his knees among the rose petals, looking entirely hollowed out, staring blankly at the paper on the floor. Claire was frantically trying to pull him up, but her own legs were trembling too much to be of any help. Around them, the wealthy guests had already pulled out their iPhones. Camera shutters clicked and flashes flared across the room like a localized lightning storm. I stood at the foot of the stage, my back turned to the wreckage. I took a fresh glass of champagne from a passing waiter's tray and took a slow sip. The cool, crisp liquid slid down my throat, soothing the slight tightness in my chest. Within 2 minutes, Ethan's mother, Miranda Carter, pushed her way through the crowd. Draped in a dark green designer dress and sporting a pearl necklace the size of walnuts, she stormed up to the stage in a frenzy, hauling Ethan up by his collar. She whipped around to face me, her heavily made-up face contorted with rage. "Vivian, what is the meaning of this? Today is supposed to be a milestone celebration for Ethan. How dare you pull a stunt like this to humiliate us?" I set my glass down and looked at her with a calm smile. "Mrs. Carter, you have that backward. Today is my birthday. Your son chose my birthday gala to publicly dump me for another woman. Tell me, who humiliated whom?" Miranda choked on her words. Her eyes darted around the room, and she instantly shifted her tactics. "It's just a bit of money. The Shepherd family has more money than they know what to do with. What is 30 million to you? Ethan has worked himself to the bone for you these past 3 years. Even if you don't care about his love, have you no decency to demand a debt like this in public?" I smiled, walked back up to the stage, picked up the promissory note, and flicked a speck of dust off it. I held it up for Miranda to see. Black ink on white paper, notarized and stamped. "Mrs. Carter, if you think it's such a trivial amount, perhaps you'd like to write me a check right now? With everyone here as our witness, it would make things incredibly simple." Miranda's face turned from red to an unsightly purple. It wasn't that the Carter family couldn't scrape the money together, but $48 million would effectively liquidate more than half of their entire family assets. She turned on Ethan, shaking his arm. "What is wrong with you? Why on earth did you sign a document like this?" Ethan looked utterly defeated, his voice barely a whisper. "Mom, the company was just starting out back then. No bank would approve our commercial loans. Vivian said she'd only give me the funds if I signed a formal promissory note." Miranda slapped his arm in frustration. "You absolute fool." I watched the mother-son duo with cold amusement. Over the past 3 years, starting from the moment I first lent Ethan that money, Miranda had taken countless luxury gifts from me under the guise of family-to-be. Just last year, when she complained about her back pain, I bought her a $30 million estate with a private thermal spa in Aspen. The year before, when Ethan claimed his company had cash flow issues, I personally injected another $15 million. Earlier this year, to help him expand, I leveraged several of my own commercial properties to guarantee his bank loans. Every single transaction was meticulously documented in my personal ledgers. Claire finally managed to stand, gripping the edge of the presenter's podium for support. Her face was as pale as her dress. She looked at Ethan, then at me, her eyes overflowing with tears. "Miss Shepherd, I truly had no idea. I didn't know there was so much financial entanglement between you two. He didn't tell me it was like this." I walked over to her, tilting my head slightly. Up close, she was undeniably beautiful, wide, innocent eyes and a delicate, fragile frame that practically screamed for protection. I leaned in, keeping my voice low so only she could hear. "Let me guess, Claire. Did he tell you that he and I had already broken up months ago? Did he tell you that the Shepherds were using our wealth to bully him, and that he only stayed with me because I threatened him with financial ruin? Or did he claim he was a self-made tech prodigy who built his empire entirely on his own merits?" Claire's tears pooled in her eyes, her lips parting slightly in shock. Her expression told me everything I needed to know. I had hit the nail right on the head. I took a step back, my voice returning to its normal, clear volume so the entire room could hear. "Very well. Since we've laid everything out on the table, let's make things simple. 3 years ago, Ethan was a nobody. I, Vivian Shepherd, funded his very first venture. Over the last 3 years, the capital I've funneled into him easily exceeds $50 million. Whether we call it a loan or an investment, I have one question for you tonight, Ethan. Are you going to pay me back or not?" Hundreds of eyes locked onto Ethan. He stood there, his tuxedo wrinkled, sweat glistening on his forehead. He looked at Claire, then at his mother, and finally at me. His gaze held a mixture of resentment, anger, and a bizarre, lingering sense of disbelief. He grit his teeth. Vivian, is this? You were the one who walked onto the stage at my birthday party to ruin our engagement. Now you're trying to play the victim? Let's keep things professional, Ethan. Miranda jumped in to shield her son. What professionalism? A woman is supposed to support her man. Just because our Ethan doesn't want to marry you anymore doesn't give you the right to hold him hostage with money. I'm telling you, Vivian, we aren't paying you back a single dime. Go ahead and sue us. Let's see who loses more face in court. Hearing this, I smiled. I reached back into my clutch and pulled out a second document, holding it up for the room to see. Since Mrs. Carter wants to play hardball, let's take a look at this. This is a formal equity proxy agreement. Ethan's startup was registered with a capital of $30 million. 60% of the company's actual equity is legally held by me. Ethan's face went even paler than before, resembling a freshly plastered wall. He lunged forward, trying to snatch the document from my hand, but I stepped aside gracefully. He stumbled, nearly falling flat on his face. Vivian. When did you? What is the meaning of this? His voice cracked, rising to a shrill panic. It means, Mr. Carter, that the CEO chair you've been sitting in for the past 3 years actually belongs to me, I said, my voice dripping with sweet sarcasm. Every corporate decision, every contract, and every dollar of profit you made was essentially you working as my hired help. Now that you're moving on to someone else, I think it's time we perform a thorough audit of the company's books. Someone in the crowd yelled, "Brilliant!" A wave of applause, cheers, and laughter erupted. The pitying looks from earlier had completely vanished, replaced by the sheer excitement of watching a high society train wreck. The birthday gala had transformed into a primetime comedy show. I glanced back toward the entrance. The tall silhouette in the black suit was gone. No matter. I wasn't in a hurry. Tonight's show was only the opening act. Miranda was completely frantic now. She clutched Ethan's arm, both of them trembling like dry leaves in a storm. Claire silently took several steps back, putting some distance between herself and Ethan. That tiny, calculated retreat didn't escape my notice, and I couldn't help but chuckle. Suddenly, the heavy double doors of the ballroom swung open. Eleanor Shepard, my mother, strode back into the room, her Chanel suit immaculate, her hair pinned up flawlessly. She exuded absolute authority, flanked by 4 burly security guards in dark suits. She walked straight to the stage, her gaze cutting through Miranda and Ethan like a winter wind. Miranda, my mother spoke, her voice low but carrying an immense weight that instantly silenced the room. Did you just say a woman is supposed to subserviently support her man? Miranda's bravado instantly withered at the sight of my mother. She stammered, Eleanor. I didn't mean it like that. You didn't? My mother let out a cold laugh. She pulled a thick stack of legal documents and property deeds from her designer tote bag and slammed them onto the stage table. These are the deeds to the Aspen Chalet, the titles to the Maybach, the receipts for the $300,000 Patek Philippe watch, and the commercial lease agreements for the retail spaces my daughter handed to your family. Total value: $18 million. She tapped the pile of documents with a manicured finger. As of today, we are reclaiming every single asset. Miranda, your family has lived off the Shepard family's wealth for 3 years. If you think you can simply flip the script and walk away, you are sorely mistaken. You have 3 days to return everything, or we will see you in federal court. Miranda stood frozen, unable to utter a single word. Ethan looked utterly broken, his shoulders slumping as if he had aged a decade in seconds. I stood beside my mother, looking out at the stunned faces of New York's elite. For the first time all night, I felt that this birthday had been entirely worth it. Once my mother slammed those deeds onto the table, the room remained dead silent. Miranda stared at the paperwork, her lips trembling for a long moment before she managed to choke out, Eleanor, we've been friends for decades. Is this really necessary? My mother scoffed. Friends? Your son just humiliated my daughter in front of hundreds of people, and you ask me if this is necessary? Miranda, have you forgotten how much you've taken from us over the last 3 years? When you complained about your joint pain, my daughter flew in top orthopedic specialists from Switzerland. When you wanted to invest, I personally wired you $5 million without a second thought. Even that designer dress you're wearing was paid for on my tab. Look at your own conscience. Do you honestly think you've treated us fairly? Miranda was thoroughly cornered, standing there like a statue. Ethan finally found his voice, stepping in front of his mother. He glared at my mother, his jaw tight. Mrs. Shepherd, what happened between Vivian and me is strictly between the two of us. Please leave my mother out of this, and where was this protective instinct when your mother was insulting my daughter? My mother snapped back, her sharp gaze instantly shutting him up. She turned to the rest of the room, her voice rising so it carried clearly. To everyone present tonight, effective immediately, the Shepherd family is cutting all ties with the Carters. All gifted assets must be returned within 3 days, or we will pursue full legal recourse. A low murmur swept through the crowd as guests began recording the scene on their phones. This birthday party was turning out to be far more entertaining than any reality television drama. I gently tugged on my mother's arm. Mom, that's enough. Let's wrap this up. My mother looked at me, patting my hand gently, before turning back to the guests with a polished, gracious smile. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption. Tonight's gala is officially concluded. The Shepherd family will host another dinner soon to properly welcome you all back. With that announcement, the crowd began to disperse, whispering excitedly among themselves as they headed for the coat check. Miranda and Ethan tried to slip out quietly through the side exit, with Claire trailing closely behind them, keeping her head low. I watched their retreating figures, feeling a profound sense of satisfaction. Just as Ethan reached the door, he stopped and looked back at me. His eyes were a turbulent mix of resentment, regret, and a deep, agonizing confusion. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but before he could, his mother dragged him out into the hallway. Once the room cleared out, our close family friends and relatives gathered around to offer their condolences. I smiled and reassured them one by one. I'm perfectly fine, really. It was bound to happen sooner or later. Thank you for your concern. After wrapping up the pleasantries, my mother joined me, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. Her voice was thick with worry. Vivian, I had no idea you were carrying all this by yourself. Why didn't you tell me about the $30 million earlier? If I had told you, would you have let me lend it to him? I smiled gently. Don't worry, Mom, I have everything under control. She sighed, smoothing down my hair. All right. Leave the rest of the cleanup to me. Go home and get some rest. I nodded and walked toward the exit. As I passed the ballroom doors, I noticed a young waiter in the corner holding up his phone, recording me. I didn't bother stopping him and kept walking. On the ride home, my mother popped open a bottle of vintage red wine, insisting on pouring us each a glass. I leaned back against the leather seat, staring out the window at the blurred neon lights of Manhattan, mentally reviewing the ledger of the past 3 years. 3 years ago, Ethan Carter was a nobody. His father had passed away early, leaving his mother to raise him on a tight budget. The first time I met him, he was wearing a slightly faded white dress shirt, standing in the lobby of my family's office building with a pitch deck in his hand, looking for investors. I had just returned from my studies in the UK. Having some free time, I flipped through his proposal and found it surprisingly promising. I invited him for a coffee to discuss it. Before long, he started pursuing me. Back then, Ethan was a far cry from the arrogant CEO he was tonight. He would bring me homemade soup when I worked late nights at the office, remember my calendar to make me warm tea, and drive across the city in torrential rain just to pick me up. My mother had opposed the relationship initially, arguing that his background didn't align with ours. But I was stubborn, and she eventually relented. When I decided to fund his startup, he insisted on writing a promissory note with his signature and thumbprint to prove he wasn't just after my money. What he didn't realize was that from that very day, I had begun preparing for the possibility of tonight. I first discovered his infidelity 6 months ago. I had returned early from a business trip to surprise him, carrying a box of his favorite pastries to his apartment. When I unlocked the door, the apartment was dark. On the coffee table sat 2 wine glasses, one of them stained with a distinct shade of designer lipstick. I stood in the doorway for a few seconds, set the pastries on the counter, and quietly left. I immediately hired a private investigator to track the owner of that lipstick. It belonged to Claire Vance. Further investigation revealed that over the past 6 months, Ethan had been quietly transferring company assets into the names of Claire's relatives. He thought he was being incredibly clever, but he forgot that I held 60% of his company's shares. From that day on, I waited. I waited for him to show his hand, to dig his own grave. I even leaked the news of Claire's return to the press and played the part of the oblivious, trusting fiancé. He took the bait perfectly. I had my secretary spread rumors that the Shepherd family planned to announce our wedding date at my birthday gala. I knew Ethan's pride wouldn't allow him to accept that, forcing him to preemptively break off the engagement publicly to establish himself as an independent, self-made man. He didn't disappoint. As the town car pulled into the driveway of our estate, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I answered. A deep, smooth male voice came through the line, laced with a hint of amusement. "Miss Shepherd, tonight's performance was spectacular." I raised an eyebrow. "Who is this? I saw you leaving the hotel just now, but didn't get a chance to say hello." The voice paused. "Tomorrow afternoon at 3, Apex Tower, Penthouse Suite. I have a business proposal I'd like to discuss." "Do you remember Marcus Hayes?" Marcus Hayes. The name drifted up from the depths of my memory. 5 years ago, there was a quiet, thin college student who used to sell handmade leather goods on a pedestrian bridge near NYU. I had passed by, noticed his exceptional craftsmanship, bought out his entire inventory, and handed him my card, telling him to reach out if he ever needed financial help. Later, he did reach out, and I lent him a modest sum of money. We eventually lost touch. "I remember," I said. 3 o'clock tomorrow. I'll be there." I hung up. Outside the window, a light drizzle began to fall. I leaned back against the seat, feeling the tension that had gripped me for the past 6 months finally begin to melt away. I didn't sleep well that night. I lay in bed, watching the rain tap against the window pane, running through the details of the past 3 years in my mind. When the sky began to turn a pale gray, I gave up on sleep, got out of bed, and headed to my study. I opened the floor safe and pulled out 3 thick binders. The top one was labeled Ethan Carter, Financial Records. I flipped through the pages. The very first wire transfer was dated 3 years ago. $30 million. Earmarked as seed capital. What followed were monthly transfers of varying amounts, some for a few $100,000, others for several million. During his startup's infancy, the burn rate was incredibly high, and I constantly filled the gaps. Back then, he would call me every night to report his progress, his excitement palpable even through the phone. I turned to the records from early last year. My accounting team had flagged several suspicious transactions. Starting last February, Ethan's company began making regular payments of $300,000 to an account registered under Clarity Art Studio. Clarity. Claire's English name. How poetic. By the first half of this year, those transfers totaled over $2 million. Ethan likely assumed that by masking them as consulting and marketing fees, I would never notice. He forgot that I employed an entire team of top-tier forensic auditors. The next section of the binder contained photographs. Ethan and Claire at various restaurants, hotels, and airports. The most telling photograph was taken at a high-end jewelry boutique in Soho, showing Ethan slipping a diamond ring onto Claire's finger. The timestamp was from March of this year, a day he claimed he was away on a critical business trip. I set the photos aside and pulled out the forensic audit report. I had paid $80,000 to a top firm to dissect his company's financials. The report clearly identified at least 4 instances of major fund diversion, totaling over $5 million, all routed to offshore shell companies controlled by Claire's relatives. This was my real leverage. At the gala, I had only shown the promissory note and the equity agreement. Those were enough to shock him, but this audit report was the real killing blow. If I handed this to the district attorney, Ethan would easily face up to 10 years in federal prison for grand larceny and corporate fraud. I rubbed my temples and headed downstairs. My mother was already in the kitchen, and the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. She looked up and smiled as I walked in. "How did you sleep, sweetie?" "All right," I said, taking a seat at the island. My mother set a plate of eggs and toast in front of me, her smile fading into a look of serious concern. "Vivian, be honest with me. What is your plan for Ethan? Yesterday was a great start, but I know Miranda. She's vindictive and she will try to lash out." "I know," I replied, taking a sip of coffee. "That's why I have a safety net." She stared at me for a moment, then nodded. "As long as you know what you're doing, just remember, no matter what happens, your father and I have your back." After breakfast, I drove to my office. On the way, my CFO called, her voice buzzing with excitement. "Miss Shepard, Ethan's legal counsel reached out first thing this morning regarding the equity agreement. They're taking a very aggressive stance, demanding a formal meeting. Tell them to schedule it with our legal department," I instructed calmly. "We have all the paperwork ready. Let them bring whatever they have." I hung up and texted my secretary to clear my afternoon calendar for my 3 o'clock meeting at Apex Tower. She replied almost instantly. "Understood, Miss Shepard. Also, a courier from Vanguard Group dropped off a package at 10 this morning. It's a preliminary joint venture proposal from Mr. Hayes." Marcus Hayes. The man moved quickly. Back at my desk, I reviewed the proposal. It was a massive commercial real estate development plan in Brooklyn with a conservative profit projection of over $100 million. The risk mitigation terms and financial structuring were incredibly precise. It was the work of an absolute professional. I checked the time. 2:45 p.m. Perfect. I arrived at Apex Tower right at 3. The private elevator took me straight to the penthouse. When the doors opened, I saw a tall man standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the Manhattan skyline. At the sound of my footsteps, he turned around. He had a strikingly sharp, handsome face, with a cool, confident air about him and a faint, relaxed smile. "Miss Shepard, it's been a long time." I compared his face to the memory of the quiet, thin college student from 5 years ago. The features were the same, but the youthful insecurity was entirely gone, replaced by an aura of absolute authority and sophistication. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit with sapphire cufflinks that caught the light. "Marcus," I said, extending my hand. "It really has been a while." He shook my hand, his grip firm and warm. "I've kept that loan in mind all these years. Today, I'd like to return it to you, with interest." He slid a cashier's check across the mahogany desk. I glanced at the figure. It was exactly 3 times the amount I had originally lent him. I slid it back. "The principal is more than enough, Marcus. I don't need the interest." Marcus sat back in his chair, gesturing for me to sit. "I insist. These past 5 years, I've done quite well for myself. I returned to New York 6 months ago and heard you were working with Ethan, so I decided to keep my distance for a while." I took a sip of the tea he had prepared. "So you've been watching from the sidelines?" Marcus let out a soft laugh. "I watched a brilliant performance. When you took off your ring and started clapping yesterday, I was standing right by the doors. It was spectacular." "So you were the man in the black suit," I said, setting my cup down. He nodded. "Just passing by." I didn't expect to catch such an entertaining show. I leaned back, studying him. "So, is this meeting strictly to repay a debt, Or do you actually want to discuss business? Both, Marcus said, sliding the joint venture proposal toward me. I've been preparing this project for 6 months, and I need a strong partner. The Shepherd family's capital and local influence, combined with my development team, will easily double our returns. I flipped through the document. It was indeed an exceptional opportunity, but I didn't commit immediately. I closed the folder. I'll need some time to review this with my team. Of course, Marcus stood up, extending his hand again. Take all the time you need. If you ever need resources to deal with Ethan, my legal team specializes in white-collar crime and corporate litigation. I shook his hand. Thank you, but I think I have it covered for now. As I sat in my car in the parking garage, I spent 10 minutes analyzing our meeting. Marcus's reappearance was incredibly well-timed. He showed up right as I broke things off with Ethan, carrying a perfect business proposal that aligned with my family's interests. Was it purely coincidental, or was there more to it? I couldn't tell yet, but it didn't matter. My immediate priority was Ethan. My phone vibrated. It was a landline number. I picked up, and a deep, authoritative male voice came through the line. Miss Shepherd? This is Richard Vance, Claire's father. If you're available, I'd like to invite you for lunch tomorrow. Richard Vance, the self-made billionaire who built an empire in construction materials. I smiled. Of course, Mr. Vance, you name the place. I hung up, looking out at the busy Manhattan traffic. Ethan's backing was finally showing itself. This was perfect. It saved me the trouble of hunting them down one by one. Richard Vance had selected a highly exclusive private club in Greenwich, Connecticut. The entrance was entirely unassuming, but the interior was a masterclass in classic New England luxury manicured gardens, stone pathways, and isolated dining pavilions that offered absolute privacy. When I arrived, Richard was already seated, meticulously preparing a pot of high-end tea. He looked remarkably young for his mid-50s, with thick dark hair and gold-rimmed glasses. He looked more like a university professor than a ruthless industrialist, but I knew his reputation. He was notoriously calculating. Miss Shepherd, please. Have a seat, Richard said warmly, gesturing to the chair across from him. Try this tea. It's an exceptionally rare vintage. I sat down and accepted the cup. The amber liquid was incredibly smooth and fragrant. Thank you, Mr. Vance. I'm honored you'd share such a rare selection with me. Richard offered a polite smile. Miss Shepherd, your composure at the gala yesterday was remarkable. You certainly didn't look like someone who would be easily intimidated. I held my cup, remaining silent, waiting for him to make the first move. Richard took a slow sip of his tea before continuing in a relaxed tone. My daughter, Claire, has been incredibly spoiled since she was a child. She's headstrong. I wasn't aware of her involvement with Ethan until yesterday. Young people's romantic entanglements are usually none of my business. He paused, looking directly at me. However, regarding the money Ethan owes you, is there room for a compromise? What kind of compromise? I asked. I will personally pay you the $30 million of principal, Richard said, raising 3 fingers. We waive the interest, you return the assets reclaimed from the Carters, and we put this matter to rest. Let's keep things civil. I set my cup down and offered a thin smile. Mr. Vance, the promissory note clearly stipulates a 20% annual interest rate. The total outstanding balance is $48 million. If you only pay the $30 million, who covers the remaining $18 million? Richard's smile faltered slightly. Miss Shepherd, in business, it's always wise to leave a way out. $48 million is a substantial sum, and backing someone into a corner rarely yields good results. Are you threatening me, Mr. Vance? I asked, my tone entirely flat. Not at all, Richard replied, his warm smile returning. I've simply been in this city long enough to have built a significant network. You have a long career ahead of you, and there's no need to make powerful enemies over a bit of interest. His meaning was crystal clear. Compromise, or I will make sure your family's business suffers. The Vance family controlled a massive share of the regional construction market, which heavily overlapped with our commercial real estate ventures. But I had done my homework. I pulled out my phone, unlocked it, and slid it across the table toward him. Richard looked down, and his polite expression instantly froze. The screen displayed a detailed financial ledger of an offshore transaction. The recipient was a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands, and the transfer amount was exactly $27 million. The named beneficiary of that shell company was Richard's brother-in-law. I took another sip of my tea. That $27 million offshore investment your company made last year. It doesn't look entirely compliant with federal regulations. I understand the IRS and the SEC have been exceptionally strict about undeclared foreign transfers lately. If this file found its way to the federal authorities, what do you think would happen? The warmth completely vanished from Richard's face. His eyes narrowed behind his gold-rimmed glasses as he stared at me in silence. The only sound in the pavilion was the gentle trickle of the stone fountain outside. "Where did you get this, Miss Shepherd?" His voice was barely a whisper. "That's not important," I replied, reclaiming my phone. "What matters, Mr. Vance, is whether you still think I should compromise." Richard remained silent for a long moment, his fingers tapping rhythmically against the wooden table. Suddenly, he let out a genuine, booming laugh. "Impressive. Truly impressive. You have far more grit than your father, Miss Shepherd." "Fine. I will wire the $48 million to your account. I have one more condition," I added. Richard raised an eyebrow. "Go on." "Ethan diverted $5 million of company funds to Claire's relatives. I will waive the criminal prosecution for that embezzlement as a gesture of goodwill to your daughter." I met his gaze. "But from this moment on, the Vance family must cut Ethan Carter off completely. If Claire still wants to be with him, that's her choice, but not a single dime of Vance money is to be used to bail him out." Richard stared at me in shock before laughing again. "You really are driving him into a corner, aren't you? You're leaving him entirely broke and without a safety net." "He made his choice," I said simply. Richard stood up, extending his hand. "Agreed. The funds will be in your account by tomorrow morning. From this point forward, Ethan Carter's problems have nothing to do with the Vance family." I shook his hand, gathered my things, and walked out. As I reached the door, I heard Richard call out behind me, "Miss Shepherd, if you were my son, I'd gladly hand you my entire empire." I didn't look back and simply waved my hand as I walked into the sunlight. As I got into my car, my phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. "How did the meeting go? Did Richard cause any trouble?" He was remarkably well informed. I replied, "Everything went smoothly." When I returned to my office that afternoon, my secretary informed me that Ethan had been waiting in the reception room for nearly 2 hours. I smiled. The man was losing his patience. When I opened the door, Ethan was standing by the window, aggressively tapping his foot. The ashtray on the table was filled with cigarette butts. At the sound of the door, he whipped around, his eyes sunken and dark circles framing his face. He looked incredibly disheveled. "Vivian," he rasped, his voice incredibly dry. I sat down across from him. "What do you want?" Ethan walked over, slamming both hands onto my desk, leaning in close. The heavy scent of tobacco and cheap cologne was suffocating. "We need to talk. I'll find a way to pay you back the money, but you cannot touch my company. That is 3 years of my hard work. You can't just take it away with a single piece of paper." "The entire starting capital for that company came from my trust fund," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "What exactly was your hard work?" "Ethan, be honest with yourself. Without my money, what would you be right now?" Ethan's eyes darted around, his throat dry. He sat back, letting out a self-deprecating laugh. "Right. You're entirely right. Without Vivian Shepherd, there is no Ethan Carter. But have you ever stopped to think about why I sought out Claire? Why I wanted to be with her? Why should I care?" I countered. Ethan stared at me, his eyes filled with a desperate, twisted emotion. "Because you are too strong, Vivian. You arranged everything, decided everything, and you were always superior. I felt like a shadow standing next to you. Claire is different. She needs me. She relies on me. Around her, I actually feel like a man." I stared at him, and then I burst out laughing. The sheer absurdity of his logic was staggering. I stood up, walked over to him, and patted his shoulder gently. "Ethan, if you need a weak, dependent woman just to feel like a competent man, then you are far more pathetic than I thought. The promissory note is in my hands, and the 60% equity is mine. You can marry whoever you want, but you will pay me back every single cent." I turned and walked toward the door. Behind me, I heard a heavy thud as his knees hit the hardwood floor, followed by his cracking, desperate voice. "Vivian. I was wrong. Please, just give me one more chance." I paused at the door without turning around. "It's too late, Ethan. The moment you chose to make your announcement on that stage, we were officially done. From that point on, we only have accounts to settle, not feelings." I stepped out and closed the door behind me. My heels clicked sharply against the polished office floor, echoing through the empty hallway. By the day after Ethan's visit to my office, rumors had spread throughout the company. The reception staff whispered that Mr. Carter had left the building looking entirely broken, his eyes red and his posture slumped. I paid no attention to the gossip and instructed my legal team to finalize all our documentation. Then, I called our media department. "Tonight at 8, I want to host a live broadcast on our official corporate channels. Ensure the technical setup is flawless." "Understood, Miss Shepard. We'll have everything ready." At 7:50 p.m., I sat in front of the camera, my desk arranged with folders of evidence. I wore a sharp crimson blazer, giving me a commanding, polished appearance. By 8:00 p.m., the live stream went live. The viewer count climbed rapidly, surpassing 100,000 within 10 minutes. I smiled at the lens. "Good evening, everyone. I am Vivian Shepard. I'm hosting this broadcast tonight to clarify a few matters regarding Carter Technologies. Many of you have likely seen the footage from my birthday gala. Some have called me ruthless, others say I acted appropriately. Tonight, I won't debate right or wrong. I am simply here to present the facts." I picked up the first folder, displaying a bank ledger to the camera. "These are the certified bank records of Carter Technologies over the past year. They show a series of unauthorized transfers totaling over $5 million. The receiving entity is Clarity Art Studio, along with 3 other shell companies registered under the names of Claire Vance's immediate family members." I laid out the corporate registration documents side by side. In other words, company funds were systematically diverted to the relatives of Mr. Carter's new partner. This is a clear case of corporate embezzlement. The chat section of the live stream went absolutely wild. "Oh my God, embezzlement? That's a major federal crime." No wonder he collapsed on his knees at the gala. He knew he was caught red-handed. And Claire Vance played the innocent victim the whole time? Unbelievable. I took a slow sip of water and picked up the second set of documents. Furthermore, we have retrieved email correspondences between Mr. Carter and our primary market competitors. These emails contain highly confidential trade secrets, proprietary algorithms, and our strategic expansion plans for the coming year. Mr. Carter willingly shared this data, violating his fiduciary duties and intellectual property agreements. The chat erupted again, with viewers calling for immediate legal action and tagging the Ken's federal regulatory accounts. I continued, displaying the third document. Additionally, during our relationship, Mr. Carter secured 3 separate commercial loans totaling $12 million using my name as a personal guarantor. He has defaulted on these loans, leaving the financial liability entirely on me. However, the signature on these guarantee agreements is a forgery. We have already submitted these files to a certified handwriting analyst for forensic verification. I leaned forward, looking directly into the camera. To summarize, Mr. Carter has not only breached our personal trust, but he has also engaged in systematic corporate fraud, trade secret theft, and forgery. Each of these offenses carries significant federal prison sentences. The live viewer count surpassed 500,000. I did not host this stream for sympathy, I concluded smoothly. I simply believe the public deserves to see the reality behind the polished corporate image. Thank you all for your time. Within 30 minutes of ending the broadcast, my phone was ringing off the hook. The first call was from my mother, her voice filled with excitement. Vivian, is all of that true? You have to submit those files to the district attorney immediately. They are already being filed tomorrow morning, Mom, I reassured her. The next call came from an unknown number. When I answered, Miranda's shrill voice pierced the line. Vivian, what is the meaning of this? Why did you put those documents online? Do you have any idea what people are saying about Ethan now? You've completely ruined his reputation. He should have considered his reputation before he stole from my company, I replied coldly. Did you really think his actions wouldn't catch up to him? Miranda's tone suddenly shifted, breaking into desperate sobs. Vivian, please, I beg of you, spare my son. He's young, he was foolish, and he was blinded by that Vance girl. I will force him to come back to you. He will apologize and be a good husband, I promise. No need, Mrs. Carter, I said. We are far past that point. I hung up and silenced my phone. The next morning, I arrived at the district attorney's office with my legal team, presenting the binders of audited evidence. The senior investigator reviewed the files, his expression growing increasingly serious. Miss Shepard, this is an exceptionally thorough file. We will initiate a formal investigation immediately. As I stepped out of the building, a light rain began to fall. I took a deep breath, feeling a massive weight lift from my shoulders. The accounts were finally being settled. My phone buzzed. It was Marcus. I watched the stream. Incredible efficiency. It's not efficiency, I wrote back. I've simply tolerated it for too long. Are you free for dinner tonight? He asked. Let's celebrate, I smiled. Sure, you pick the place. That evening, over a quiet dinner, Marcus brought up the case. My contacts at the DA's office say the evidence is airtight. An arrest warrant will likely be issued within the week. I nodded, enjoying my meal. It's what he deserves. Do you feel any regret? Marcus asked softly, studying my face. After 3 years together? I set my fork down and met his gaze. A little, perhaps. But some people are like wild animals, no matter how much you feed them, they will still bite the hand that helps them. I'd rather put them in a cage before they can ruin my life. Marcus smiled, raising his wine glass. To new beginnings. Our glasses clinked, the clear sound echoing in the quiet restaurant. 2 days later, I returned to my office to find my secretary looking uneasy. Miss Shepard, Miranda Carter has been waiting in the lobby since early this morning. She refuses to leave until she sees you. Isaiah. Bring her up. When Miranda entered, she looked unrecognizable. The immaculate designer clothes were gone, replaced by a simple, wrinkled coat. Her hair was messy, and her face was pale and swollen from crying. She threw herself toward me, trying to grab my hands, but I stepped back. Vivian, please, I beg you, withdraw the charges. Ethan is my only son. If he goes to prison, I have nothing left. I'll get down on my knees, please. She slid onto the floor, weeping hysterically, clutching at my coat. I stood perfectly still, looking down at her. Mrs. Carter. Every step of the way, I gave Ethan opportunities to be honest. He chose to steal, forge my signature, and betray my trust. Do you honestly believe I should just overlook that? Miranda wept, unable to offer a coherent response. I gently pried her fingers from my coat, stepped toward the door, and looked back at her. The law will handle his case. I won't interfere, but I certainly won't help him either. I walked out, leaving her sobbing in the empty office. After Miranda left, I stood by my office window for a long time, watching the endless flow of yellow cabs on the streets below. Later that afternoon, the district attorney's office called to confirm that the formal indictment had been processed. Ethan's personal and corporate accounts had been frozen, and the company was in a state of absolute panic. The following morning, my home security system alerted me to a visitor at the gate. I looked at the monitor. Ethan was standing outside, wearing a wrinkled jacket, his hair disheveled, leaning heavily against the wrought iron gate. I opened the door and walked out into the courtyard. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of blooming magniflora. Ethan staggered toward me, smelling strongly of alcohol. "Vivian, you won." The investigators came. "They told me I'm looking at up to 8 years. He collapsed onto a stone bench, burying his face in his hands. 8 years, Vivian. I'll be nearly 40 when I get out. My life is over." I stood before him, my hands slipped into my coat pockets. "You should have thought of that before you committed grand larceny, Ethan. What am I supposed to do now?" He looked up, his eyes bloodshot. "Tell me, what do you want from me?" "Surrender, plead guilty, and cooperate with the asset liquidation," I said calmly. "I will waive the personal liability for the bank guarantees, but the $5 million you diverted must be accounted for." Ethan's shoulders slumped, his spirit completely broken. "How?" "The money is gone. Richard Vance cut us off completely, and Claire won't even take my calls." "That is your problem to solve," I replied, turning back toward the house. "Vivian," he called out, his voice cracking, "why did you ever lend me that money in the first place? If you hadn't, maybe we wouldn't have ended up like this." I paused, looking back at him. "I lent you that money because I genuinely cared for you and wanted to see you succeed. But you valued my wealth far more than you ever valued me. Once you chose to betray me, we were done." I walked inside and shut the heavy oak door. 2 minutes later, the security monitor showed him slowly walking away down the driveway. That afternoon, I met Marcus at the Brooklyn development site. He was standing by the construction entrance, wearing a hard hat over his dark hair, reviewing a set of blueprints with his project manager. He smiled as I approached. "Welcome to the future site of the Shepherd Hayes Plaza." We walked through the active construction zone, Marcus pointing out the design layouts and retail spaces. "Why did you choose this specific location, Marcus?" I asked. He stopped, looking out over the East River. 10 years ago, your father tried to acquire this parcel for a major commercial project. He was shut out by a hostile consortium of local developers. I knew it was a project he always regretted losing. I wanted to make sure we secured it for him." I stared at him, deeply touched. "How did you find out about that?" Marcus shrugged, a warm smile gracing his features. "I do my research. 5 years ago, when my mother was hospitalized and I had no options, you bought my entire inventory and gave me a chance. I've never forgotten that. I wanted to return the favor by helping you build something truly lasting." The breeze from the river carried the scent of salt and fresh cement. I looked at him, realizing that the quiet boy from the bridge had grown into a man of immense depth and loyalty. "Thank you, Marcus," I said softly. "We're partners, Vivian," he replied, his eyes holding mine. "This is just the beginning." Ethan's trial was brief. With the overwhelming evidence submitted by our forensic team, his legal counsel advised him to plead guilty to corporate fraud and embezzlement. He was sentenced to 6 years in a federal correctional facility. Claire Vance issued a formal public statement claiming she was entirely unaware of Ethan's financial misconduct and had been a victim of his manipulation. The Vance family quickly distanced themselves from the entire affair, sending Claire back to Europe to avoid the media fallout. With the scandal settled, our joint venture with Vanguard Group was officially signed. The financial projections were outstanding, positioning the Shepherd Group to become one of the premier commercial developers in the region. On the night the contracts were finalized, Marcus took me to a scenic overlook in the Hudson Valley, high above the twinkling lights of the city. The night air was cool, the sky clear and filled with stars. Marcus turned to me, his expression earnest. Vivian, now that the past is behind us and our project is underway, there is something I've wanted to tell you. Go on, I said, my heart beating slightly faster. 5 years ago, when you stopped at my table on that bridge, you were the first person who actually saw value in my work, he said, taking a step closer. I've carried that memory with me every single day. I know you've just gone through an incredibly difficult betrayal, and I don't expect anything immediate. But I want to pursue a relationship with you, Vivian. If you aren't ready, our professional partnership won't change. I just wanted to be honest with you. I looked at his sincere, handsome face, the city lights reflecting in his dark eyes. Marcus, I said, a soft smile breaking on my lips. I must warn you, I can be quite difficult to deal with, and my work schedule is demanding. Are you sure you're up for the challenge? He laughed, his eyes crinkling. I've reviewed the risks, and I am entirely willing to assume them. In that case, I said, you may try. His smile was bright and genuine, and as we stood together looking out over the valley, I felt a profound sense of peace. The storm had passed, and the future was entirely ours to build. A few weeks later, the court-ordered liquidation of Ethan's remaining personal assets took place. I was required to attend the final hearing to confirm the distribution of the recovered funds. The conference room at the federal courthouse was cold and sterile. To my surprise, Claire Vance was also present, accompanied by her family's legal representative. She looked pale and considerably thinner, her usual fragile charm replaced by a quiet, defensive posture. As the assets were presented, Claire's lawyer made a request. Your Honor, regarding the residential property in Long Island, my client would like to purchase it at its current valuation. She spent considerable personal effort designing the interiors, and it holds significant sentimental value. I stood up, presenting our audit documents to the judge. Your Honor, the down payment for that specific Long Island estate was paid using $500,000 of funds embezzled from my company. While Miss Vance may have designed the interiors, the foundation of that house was built on stolen capital. The judge reviewed the files and nodded. The property will proceed to public auction, with all proceeds directed to the primary creditor, Miss Shepherd. Claire looked at me, tears spilling over her lashes. Vivian. Must you take absolutely everything from us? I looked down at her, feeling neither anger nor triumph, only a calm detachment. I am simply taking back what was mine, Claire. You and Ethan built your happiness on my resources. Now, you have to learn to stand on your own. She had no response and left the room in silence. As Marcus and I walked out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sun, he looked at me. Do you still hold any bitterness toward them? No, I replied, looking up at the clear blue sky. Holding on to anger is far too exhausting. The best response is simply to live exceptionally well, far beyond their reach. Marcus smiled, opening the passenger door for me. Spoken like a true partner. Let's go grab some lunch. By midsummer, the development project was progressing ahead of schedule. The initial $6 million recovered from the asset liquidation had been deposited into my accounts, with the remaining balance structured as a lifetime judgment against Ethan's future earnings. One evening, my mother called with a bit of news. Vivian, did you hear? Richard Vance is arranging a marriage for Claire with a junior partner at Vanguard Group. Apparently, it was highly encouraged by the Vanguard board. I looked over at Marcus, who was sitting on my office sofa, quietly reading through a construction report with a subtle, knowing smile on his face. I see, I said to my mother, smiling. It sounds like a very stable arrangement. After hanging up, I walked over to Marcus. You arranged that, didn't you? Marcus looked up, offering an innocent shrug. It's a mutually beneficial partnership. It keeps everyone occupied and out of our way. I laughed, sitting down beside him. You are incredibly calculating, Mr. Hayes. Only when it comes to protecting what matters to me, he said softly, reaching out to take my hand. His palm was warm and reassuring. Later that evening, we took the elevator to the top floor of our nearly completed skyscraper. The wind on the roof was strong, carrying the warm, sweet scent of a New York summer night. Below us, the lights of Manhattan stretched out like a sea of diamonds, vibrant and endless. I walked to the edge, looking out over the city that had witnessed my challenges, my betrayal, and my ultimate rise. Marcus stood beside me, his arm wrapping gently around my waist, shielding me from the cool wind. "In 2 years," he said, looking out over the skyline, "this entire plaza will be fully operational. You'll be standing here, looking down at a thriving development we built together." "I look forward to it," I said, leaning my head against his shoulder. The past was entirely settled. The debts had been paid, the betrayals resolved, and the people who had sought to diminish me were left far below. Standing here, high above the city, with a partner who stood firmly by my side, I knew that the road ahead was wide open, bright, and entirely mine.